My name is Claire Taylor, and at 32 years old, I never thought I'd find myself smiling when I heard my little brother Dylan had been arrested. The golden child, the favorite, the one my parents had mortgaged their souls for while leaving me to drown during my divorce and financial collapse 2 years ago. The phone rang at 2:15 in the morning. My mother, Susan, was sobbing hysterically, my father, Robert, shouting in the background. They needed my legal expertise, my money, my help. After a lifetime of playing second fiddle, the tables had finally turned. Before I tell you how I responded to my family's desperate pleas for help, take a second to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, what happened next changed our family dynamic forever. Growing up in the suburbs of Boston, we looked like the perfect American family, at least from the outside. My father, Robert, worked as a hospital administrator, and my mother, Susan, taught third grade at the local elementary school. We lived in a beautiful colonial-style house with a large backyard, vacationed at Cape Cod every summer, and went to church every Sunday. My childhood photo albums show a smiling little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed grin. But photos tell the story their owners want preserved. From my earliest memories, my family had set impossibly high expectations. I learned to read before kindergarten, skipped first grade, and was enrolled in every enrichment program my family could find. Monday piano lessons, Wednesday advanced math tutoring, weekend competitive swimming. There was no room for failure in the Taylor household. When I was 8 years old, everything changed with the arrival of my baby brother Dylan. I still remember the day they brought him home from the hospital, a tiny bundle with wispy blonde hair and bright blue eyes. My mother cooed over him for hours, and my father proudly paraded him around to all the neighbors. I was excited to be a big sister, naive to how his presence would reshape my entire childhood. The first signs were subtle. My piano recital that had been marked on the family calendar for months was suddenly missed because Dylan had a slight fever. Nothing serious, just a standard infant temperature, but enough that both parents stayed home with him instead of watching me play Beethoven after practicing for 3 months straight. When years passed, the pattern solidified. Dylan became the undisputed center of our family universe. When he started Little League Baseball, my parents never missed a single game, cheering loudly from the bleachers with customized t-shirts bearing his face and player number. Meanwhile, my ballet recital, debate team competitions, and honor society inductions often found me scanning the audience for faces that were rarely there. I compensated by becoming fiercely independent and self-sufficient. While Dylan had his soccer gear purchased immediately and his science projects practically completed by my parents, I worked babysitting jobs from age 12 to buy my own school supplies and stayed up late completing assignments alone. I learned to forge my mother's signature on permission slips when she was too busy helping Dylan with his homework to sign mine. The year I turned 14, I had qualified for a prestigious statewide piano competition. After months of preparation, the big day arrived. I put on my nicest dress, arranged my hair carefully, and waited by the door. 10 minutes before we needed to leave, my mother casually mentioned that they would not be attending. Dylan had a baseball game that had been rescheduled at the last minute, and they simply could not miss it. I took 3 buses across town alone to play Chopin for a crowd of strangers, won second place, and rode home with my silver trophy on my lap. When I arrived, no one asked how it went. The house was empty. They were still at Dylan's game. Despite everything, I maintained a desperate hope that my achievements would eventually earn equal love from my parents. I graduated as valedictorian of my high school class. As I delivered my speech from the podium, I spotted my parents in the crowd. For a brief moment, I saw pride in their eyes, but as soon as the ceremony ended and photographs were taken, the conversation immediately turned to Dylan's college prospects and baseball scholarship possibilities, though he was still only a freshman. That evening, as we ate celebration dinner at my favorite restaurant, a choice I was surprised they had honored, my father raised his glass in a toast. I held my breath, waiting for words of recognition and pride. "Your success reflects well on this family, Claire. Now Dylan can see what hard work looks like." I smiled and clinked my glass against his, swallowing both champagne and disappointment. Even my greatest achievements were measured by their value to my brother. All through high school, I nurtured a dream of becoming a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a top-tier attorney at a prestigious firm, someone who can make a real difference. It was partly driven by genuine interest in justice, but I cannot deny that a significant motivation was to finally make my parents see my worth. I studied for the SATs with almost manic intensity, joined every club that would look good on college applications, and wrote dozens of drafts of my personal statement. When acceptance letters arrived, including one from a prestigious East Coast university with a renowned pre-law program, my parents gave me perfunctory congratulations. The same week, Dylan had a home run that won an ordinary season game, and my parents took the entire family out for an extravagant dinner in celebration, presenting him with an expensive new gaming console as a surprise. The contrast could not have been clearer, but I had grown so accustomed to the disparity that I barely felt the sting anymore. Or at least that's what I told myself as I cried silently in my bedroom, acceptance letter clutched in my hand. College should have been my escape, a fresh start away from the shadow of being the lesser-loved child. In many ways, it was liberating. I excelled academically, making the dean's list every semester and securing coveted internships. Yet the patterns established in childhood proved difficult to break. While Dylan stumbled through his first attempt at community college, my parents paid his full tuition, bought him a car for the commute, and hired tutors when he struggled with basic courses. Meanwhile, they informed me that they could only contribute a small amount toward my education. "I understand that tuition is expensive," my father explained over the phone, "but you're smart enough to figure it out. You've always been so independent." That independence was not a choice, but a necessity born from years of emotional neglect. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus library, another 15 as a research assistant, and still managed to maintain a 3.9 GPA. During holidays, when other students went home to relax, I picked up seasonal retail jobs to save for the next semester's textbooks. In my final year of law school, during a particularly grueling study session for constitutional law, I met Matthew. He was tall, ambitious, and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had always been supported in his endeavors. When we started dating, he was appalled at how little my parents contributed to my education compared to what his parents had done for him. "Let me guess," he said after meeting them for the first time. "They spoil your brother rotten, right?" I was stunned by his immediate perception of the dynamic I had normalized for so long. Matthew saw in one dinner what I had spent a lifetime trying to ignore. When I introduced Matthew to my family, my parents were polite but reserved. They asked perfunctory questions about his background and career plans, then quickly shifted the conversation to Dylan's latest exploits. By contrast, when Dylan brought home his girlfriend of 2 weeks the following month, my mother prepared an elaborate meal with all her favorites, and my father spent hours showing her family photo albums. The most painful example of their favoritism came when they missed my law school graduation, an achievement representing 7 years of higher education and countless sacrifices. Dylan, who had by then dropped out of 3 different colleges, had a baseball game in an adult recreational league. Not a championship, not a special event, just a regular weekend game in a hobby league for post-college athletes. I have never told anyone how much I cried that night while Matthew held me and assured me that my accomplishment was extraordinary, with or without my parents' acknowledgement. The next day, I called them, and my mother casually explained they had wanted to come, but Dylan would have been so disappointed if they missed his game. The implicit message was clear. His disappointment mattered more than mine. Despite their lackluster support, Matthew and I got engaged a year after graduation. When we began planning the wedding, new tensions emerged. My parents contributed a fraction of what they could afford, yet attempted to control every decision from the guest list to the menu. When I selected a venue they deemed too expensive, my mother remarked, "Well, if you had chosen a more practical career path, like teaching, you wouldn't have all this student debt limiting your options." The irony that they had fully funded Dylan's failed attempts at degrees in fields he lost interest in after a semester was apparently lost on them. We had a small but beautiful wedding, with Matthew's warm and supportive family making up for the emotional absence of mine. My parents attended, of course, maintaining appearances as they always did. They posed for photographs, made appropriate speeches, and then complained about the limited selection at the bar and the unseasonably warm weather. After the wedding, Matthew and I settled into married life in Boston. I secured a position at a mid-sized firm specializing in corporate law, working punishing hours to establish my career. We bought a small condo, adopted a cat named Justice, and created a life that felt like a refuge from the emotional inequity of my childhood home. I made dutiful calls to my parents every Sunday, visits on major holidays, and sent thoughtful gifts for birthdays and anniversaries. Yet each interaction left me emotionally drained, as conversations inevitably centered around Dylan's latest ventures, his relationships, or my parents' concerns about his direction in life. My achievements at work, our home renovations, or plans for the future warranted only passing interest. When Matthew and I suffered a heartbreaking miscarriage in our third year of marriage, my mother expressed brief sympathy before changing the subject to Dylan's girlfriend troubles. I ended the call early and sobbed in Matthew's arms, finally voicing what I had always known but never fully acknowledged. My parents will never love me the way they love him. I will always be an afterthought. It was the first time I had said it out loud, and somehow naming the truth made it both more painful and more liberating. Matthew suggested I consider therapy to process the years of emotional neglect, but I was not ready. Instead, I threw myself deeper into my career, seeking the validation there that had always been withheld at home. 5 years into our marriage, I was offered a position at a prestigious law firm in Chicago, a significant step up in both responsibility and compensation. The decision to move meant leaving Boston, but the opportunity was too valuable to pass up. Matthew was able to transfer to his firm's Chicago office, though the move represented a lateral step rather than an advancement for him. We found a beautiful apartment in Lincoln Park with large windows overlooking the city and enough space for a home office. The first year was exhilarating. I thrived in the competitive environment of the new firm, quickly establishing myself as someone who could handle complex cases and demanding clients. My salary nearly doubled, and for the first time in my life, I felt financially secure. The distance from my parents was both physical and emotional. Our calls became less frequent, with the 3-hour time difference providing a convenient excuse. When we did speak, I found myself less affected by their persistent focus on Dylan and his struggles. I was building a life where their approval mattered less. Meanwhile, Dylan had embarked on yet another venture, a sports memorabilia business that my parents helped finance with what I later learned was a withdrawal from their retirement fund. When I expressed concern about this during a rare visit home for Thanksgiving, my father dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "Dylan has tremendous entrepreneurial spirit," he declared proudly. "He just needs the right opportunity to showcase his talents." I bit my tongue, refraining from pointing out that this was the fourth right opportunity they had financed in as many years. As my career accelerated, subtle tensions emerged in my marriage. Matthew began making comments about my long hours, the work dinners I could not miss. When the dynamic shifted with my job taking precedence, he struggled to adjust. 12 days before our 6th anniversary, I came home early planning to surprise Matthew with concert tickets. I found him in our bedroom with my colleague Sarah, a junior associate who had joined the firm 3 months earlier. The confrontation was ugly. Matthew did not deny the affair, but instead blamed me. "If you were ever home, if you ever put our marriage before your career." The accusations struck nerves exposed by years of emotional neglect. Was I truly incapable of being loved? I moved into a hotel that night. In vulnerability, I called my mother, needing parental comfort that had always been elusive. Through tears, I explained what had happened. "Well, Claire, marriages take work. Maybe if you had focused more on being a wife than on being a lawyer, things would be different." The victim blaming hit like a physical blow. I ended the call abruptly, confronting the reality that even in my darkest moment, my parents could not offer the emotional support most daughters take for granted. The divorce proceedings began 2 weeks later. What I had naively expected to be a straightforward separation became complicated when Matthew hired an aggressive attorney who challenged our prenuptial agreement. He claimed duress at the time of signing and sought half of my partnership earnings despite the fact that we had been married for just 6 years and had no children. Legal fees mounted as the process dragged on. Then, in a cosmic joke of timing, my apartment building suffered major water damage from a burst pipe in the unit above. With most of my possessions in storage and ongoing hotel costs draining my savings, I found myself in a financial spiral that my currently divided attention at work was only making worse. Desperate and humbled, I called my father. I explained that I needed a temporary loan, just $15,000, to secure a new apartment and cover living expenses until the divorce was settled. I promised to repay every cent with interest, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Your mother and I are on a fixed income now, Claire, he responded with a hint of irritation. We can't just bail you out of problems that you should have anticipated. You're a grown woman with a good job. Figure it out. The conversation left me shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. 2 days later, my cousin Jennifer called to catch up and mentioned casually that my parents had just given Dylan $50,000 to expand his struggling business. I thanked her for the call and then threw my phone against the hotel room wall so hard that the screen shattered. The months that followed my parents' rejection were the hardest of my life. The divorce dragged on, with Matthew and his attorney using every delaying tactic possible. My focus at work suffered, putting my partnership track at risk. I was forced to move into a tiny studio apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, a far cry from the spacious Lincoln Park home I had shared with Matthew. Through a mutual friend, I learned that my mother had told several family members that my divorce was my own fault for being career-obsessed and neglecting my husband. The betrayal cut deep, not just because she blamed me for Matthew's infidelity, but because she had shared this perspective with others while offering me no support. I worked 60, sometimes 70-hour weeks trying to keep my career on track while navigating the divorce proceedings. I ate microwave meals standing at my kitchen counter, fell asleep with case files scattered across my bed, and woke up with anxiety that made it hard to breathe. Through it all, my parents remained distant, their calls perfunctory when they happened at all. The contrast between their treatment of me and Dylan became even more stark during this period. While I struggled alone and unsupported, Dylan continued to receive not just financial backing, but emotional comfort as well. When his memorabilia business inevitably failed, my parents immediately funded his next idea, a sports-themed bar near Fenway Park. One evening, scrolling through social media in my empty apartment, I came across photos of my parents with Dylan and his new girlfriend on a vacation to Florida. The four of them smiling on a beach, cocktails in hand, without a care in the world. The same month, they had told me they could not afford to help me secure housing during a crisis. When Christmas arrived, I could not face the prospect of returning to Boston, of sitting at the family table pretending all was well. I called to explain that my work schedule made travel impossible, a transparent lie that no one challenged. I spent the holiday alone in my apartment, watching old movies and drinking too much wine. When my father's 60th birthday approached in February, I made an effort to reconnect. I flew to Boston for the weekend celebration, bringing a thoughtfully selected watch I could barely afford. It was a peace offering, an attempt to rebuild the relationship despite everything. At the party, I was treated as an afterthought. My mother introduced me to her friends as my daughter, the lawyer from Chicago, with none of the warmth she showed when presenting Dylan as my brilliant son who owns his own business. The breaking point came during dinner when my mother pulled me aside ostensibly to check in on how I was doing. I made the mistake of being honest, sharing that while the divorce was finally nearing completion, I was struggling emotionally with the betrayal and loneliness. She sighed heavily, patting my hand in a gesture that felt more dismissive than comforting. You know, Claire, if you had tried harder with Matthew, perhaps been more attentive, more supportive of his needs, things might have turned out differently. Men need to feel appreciated. The statement hit me like a slap. My husband had cheated on me with a colleague in our bed, and my mother was suggesting it was because I had not been attentive enough. The double standard was breathtaking. When Dylan's previous girlfriend had broken up with him because of his irresponsibility, my parents had comforted him for weeks. I stood up from the table, hands shaking. You have never, not once in my entire life, given me the benefit of the doubt or the support you freely give Dylan. I have done everything right. I have worked myself to exhaustion to make you proud. I have been independent because I had to be, not because I wanted to be. And still, you find ways to make my pain my fault. I left the party early and changed my flight to that night instead of the following day. On the plane back to Chicago, I made a decision that was both terrifying and liberating. I would stop seeking the approval and love that had been withheld for 30 years. I would build a life without the constant disappointment of parental favoritism. For the next several months, I declined calls from home, sent brief responses to texts, and made excuses to avoid visits. I sent cards on birthdays and appropriate holidays, maintaining the bare minimum of contact that would not cause a family scandal. When asked directly how I was doing, I gave vague, positive answers that closed rather than opened conversation. With the emotional drain of seeking parental approval removed from my life, I found new energy to rebuild. The divorce was finally settled, with Matthew receiving less than he had demanded, but more than he deserved. I was left with significant debt, but also with freedom and clarity of purpose. I approached my work with renewed focus and determination. No longer distracted by family drama or marital problems, I poured myself into complex cases, often staying at the office until the cleaning staff arrived. My billable hours exceeded targets by 40%, and senior partners began to take notice. Recognizing that my all-work approach was ultimately unsustainable, I also forced myself to address my emotional health. I found a therapist named Dr. Rivera who specialized in family dynamics and parental favoritism. Our weekly sessions were often painful, peeling back layers of hurt I had suppressed for decades. You have spent your entire life trying to earn love that should have been freely given, Dr. Rivera observed during one particularly difficult session. The recognition brought me to tears, but also began a process of genuine healing. Slowly, I built a chosen family of friends and colleagues who valued me for exactly who I was. My assistant, Rachel, began inviting me to her family gatherings, where her boisterous Italian-American relatives embraced me without question. Junior associates at the firm sought my mentorship, appreciating the guidance I wish I had received early in my career. Most significantly, I developed a close relationship with Victoria Chen, a senior partner who saw potential in me that I sometimes doubted myself. 58 years old, with a reputation for brilliance and brutal honesty, Victoria became the mentor I had always needed. After observing me handle a particularly challenging deposition, Victoria invited me to coffee and offered candid feedback on both my strengths and weaknesses. You have exceptional analytical skills and presence in the courtroom, she told me, but you work like someone trying to outrun something. Sustainable success requires balance. Under her guidance, I began to approach my career more strategically, focusing on quality over quantity and developing my own client relationships rather than simply executing work for senior partners. When a high-profile case involving corporate fraud allegations against a major pharmaceutical company came in, Victoria recommended me to lead the defense team despite my relatively junior status. The case consumed 6 months of my life, but resulted in a favorable settlement that saved our client millions while implementing meaningful compliance reforms. The morning after the settlement was finalized, I arrived at my office to find a handwritten note from Victoria on my desk. "Exceptional work, Claire. You have earned your place at the table, not by working yourself to death, but by being smarter and more strategic than your opponents. I see great things ahead for you." The professional success translated to financial recovery. By my 31st birthday, I had paid off the divorce-related debt and saved enough for a down payment on a small but elegant condo in a dormant building with a view of Lake Michigan. The day I signed the mortgage papers as a single woman using only my own name and credit was one of the proudest moments of my adult life. My interactions with my parents during this period were minimal and carefully managed. I called on major holidays, sent appropriate gifts, and deflected questions about visits with vague references to my busy schedule. I shared little about my professional achievements or personal growth, knowing from experience that these would be acknowledged only briefly before the conversation turned to Dylan. From occasional communications with extended family, I learned that Dylan continued his pattern of failed ventures and parental bailouts. The sports bar closed within a year, followed by an attempt at a food delivery app that never launched despite significant investment. My parents refinanced their house to fund his projects, a fact they never mentioned during our infrequent calls. In this period of rebuilding, I also cautiously re-entered the dating world. After a few forgettable first dates arranged through well-meaning friends, I met Michael at a charity gala hosted by my firm. A pediatric surgeon with kind eyes and a quick wit, he approached relationships with the same thoughtful intentionality he brought to his medical practice. Unlike Matthew, who had resented my ambition, Michael respected and admired my dedication to my career. He understood the demands of a high-pressure profession and never made me feel guilty for late nights or working weekends when necessary. More importantly, he recognized the emotional wounds I carried and never used them as weapons during disagreements. After dating for 8 months, I finally shared the full story of my family dynamics, expecting the usual uncomfortable sympathy or well-meaning but unhelpful advice. Instead, Michael listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and then said something that shifted my perspective. "Your parents' failure to value you properly reflects their limitations, not your worth," he told me, holding my hand across the dinner table. "Their inability to love you as you deserve says everything about them and nothing about you." It was a simple statement, but profound in its impact. For the first time, I truly internalized that the problem had never been me. No achievement, no success, no amount of perfection would have changed the fundamental imbalance in my parents' hearts. The liberation in that realization was life-changing. As my personal and professional life flourished, I received increasingly concerning updates about Dylan through family channels. There were rumors of gambling debts, 2 DUIs handled quietly with expensive lawyers, and business investors threatening legal action. My parents shielded him from consequences, as they always had, mortgaging their retirement security to protect him from the results of his own choices. I felt a complex mixture of emotions about his situation. There was the lingering hurt of the disparity in how we had been treated, a small, shameful part of me that felt vindicated by his failures, and genuine concern for my brother as a human being. We had never been close, the age gap and parental favoritism creating a chasm between us, but he was still family. I attempted once to reach out directly, suggesting coffee when I was in Boston for a case. His response was dismissive, clearly influenced by whatever narrative our parents had constructed about my distance from the family. I did not push further, accepting that some relationships may never be what we wish they could be. Meanwhile, Dylan had been spiraling deeper into dangerous territory. What had started as failed business ventures had evolved into something far more sinister. His latest enterprise, a cryptocurrency investment platform called Dylan Coin Solutions, promised extraordinary returns to investors while using flashy marketing and fabricated testimonials. The scheme was sophisticated for someone who had dropped out of multiple colleges. Dylan created professional-looking websites, hired actors to portray satisfied investors in video testimonials, and even rented a luxury office space in downtown Boston to meet with potential victims. He targeted middle-class retirees and small business owners, people who had worked their entire lives to build modest savings. What they didn't know was that their money was funding Dylan's extravagant lifestyle. He purchased a BMW, moved into a penthouse apartment, and took expensive vacations to Miami and Las Vegas, all while promising his investors that their returns were being reinvested for even greater profits. The house of cards began to collapse when one of his largest investors, a retired teacher named Margaret Collins, who had invested her entire pension of $80,000, demanded to withdraw her funds to pay for her husband's cancer treatment. Dylan stalled, claiming temporary liquidity issues, but Margaret's son was a financial analyst who became suspicious of the delays. When her son began investigating Dylan Coin Solutions, he discovered that the company had no legitimate cryptocurrency operations, no registered investment advisors, and no actual assets beyond the money Dylan had collected from victims. The elaborate website was a facade, the testimonials were fake, and the promised investment strategy was pure fiction. Margaret's son contacted the authorities, triggering an investigation that quickly unraveled Dylan's entire operation. Federal agents raided his apartment and office, seizing computers, financial records, and evidence of the fraudulent scheme. They discovered that Dylan had frauded nearly 40 investors out of approximately $2 million over 18 months. By my 32nd birthday, I had created a life that felt authentic and fulfilling. I had close friends, a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection, and a career trajectory that exceeded even my ambitious goals. I had made peace with the reality of my family situation, establishing boundaries that protected my emotional well-being while maintaining minimal contact. I believed I had finally broken free from the dysfunction of my childhood, that I had moved beyond the hurt and disappointment. I was wrong. The real test of my healing and of my character was about to come at 2:15 on a Tuesday morning when my phone would ring from a call from my parents' number. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the darkness of my bedroom, startling me from a deep sleep. The illuminated screen showed my parents' number, something that would have been unusual at any hour, but was alarming at 2:15 in the morning. My first thought was that someone had died. "Claire?" My mother's voice was barely recognizable, high-pitched and breathless with panic. "We need your help. It's Dylan. He's been arrested." I sat up in bed, fully awake now, aware of Michael stirring beside me. Something serious must have happened for my mother to call at this hour, especially given our distant relationship over the past year and a half. "What's happened?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite the adrenaline now coursing through my system. The story spilled out in a chaotic narrative, punctuated by my mother's sobs and my father's angry interjections in the background. Dylan had been arrested for wire fraud and embezzlement related to his latest business venture, a cryptocurrency investment platform that had apparently been operating as a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. The authorities alleged he had defrauded investors of nearly $2 million. "He needs a lawyer, Claire, a good one. Your father and we put up our house for his bail, but we need help with legal fees. You work at that big firm. You must know people. You have to help us." The desperation in my mother's voice was palpable, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old familiar response, the ingrained need to solve problems and earn approval. But alongside it rose a wave of bitter memories, the times I had needed help and been told to figure it out myself, the dismissal of my pain during the divorce, the decades of favoritism that had shaped my childhood and early adulthood. I could picture them clearly in their home in Boston, my mother in her floral robe, my father pacing in his slippers, their world collapsing around them as the golden child finally faced consequences they could not shield him from. For the first time, they needed me more than I needed them. "I'll need to know more details before I can offer any advice," I said, carefully, professional training kicking in despite the emotional complexity of the situation. "How much is the bail? What exactly are the charges? Who is representing him currently?" As they answered my questions, a clearer picture emerged, each detail more damning than the last. Dylan had created a company that promised extraordinary returns on cryptocurrency investments. He had used early investors' money to fund an extravagant lifestyle while attracting new victims with fabricated success stories. When the scheme inevitably collapsed, multiple investors had gone to authorities. The evidence against him was substantial. My parents had mortgaged their home to post his $500,000 bail, depleting their retirement savings in the process. The court had assigned a public defender whom my father dismissed as useless. They wanted me to either represent Dylan myself or arrange for my firm to take the case pro bono. They also needed money for ongoing expenses while they focused on supporting Dylan through his crisis. "Claire, you have to understand. Your father is having chest pains from the stress. We're still your parents, no matter what disagreements we've had. Family helps family." The statement landed like a cruel joke, given our history. Where was this family loyalty when I had needed it? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "I'll need to think about this," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's the middle of the night and this is a lot to process. I'll call you tomorrow after I've had some time to consider the options." My mother began to protest, but I ended the call with a firm goodbye. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, phone still in hand, emotions swirling. Michael turned on the bedside lamp and studied my face with concern. "Family emergency?" he asked gently. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Family hypocrisy emergency is more accurate." I recounted the conversation, the situation with Dylan, and the decades of context that made this middle-of-the-night plea so ironic. "What are you thinking of doing?" Michael asked, when I had finished, not offering advice, but creating space for me to process my thoughts. "My first instinct is to tell them to figure it out themselves," I admitted, to use their exact words back to them. "They abandoned me during the worst period of my life, and now they expect me to rush in and save your precious son." I paced the bedroom. Energy and anger made sleep impossible. The more I thought about it, the more my rage built. Every birthday celebration focused on Dylan. Every achievement of mine minimized. Every request for support denied while he received endless resources and chances. 30 years of inequality and emotional neglect culminating in this audacious request for help. I could refuse them outright. It would be justified, perhaps even cathartic. I imagined the satisfaction of saying no, of allowing them to experience the same abandonment they had inflicted on me. The fantasy was briefly sweet, but quickly turned hollow. Or I could help unconditionally, fall back into the familiar pattern of attempting to earn love through sacrifice and performance. Take on Dylan's case, write checks for their expenses, be the dutiful daughter despite everything. The thought made my stomach turn. Neither option felt right. Neither reflected the person I had worked so hard to become. I spent the rest of the night wrestling with the decision, weighing justice against mercy, boundaries against compassion. When morning came, I called Dr. Rivera and arranged an emergency session during my lunch break. "They have placed you in an impossible position," she observed after I explained the situation. "But this is also an opportunity to establish a new dynamic, one based on honesty and appropriate boundaries rather than resentment and capitulation." We discussed potential approaches, the psychological implications of different responses, and what healthy boundaries might look like in this specific situation. By the end of the session, I had formulated a plan that honored both my history and my healing. That evening, I called my parents back. Michael sat beside me on the couch, a silent support as I navigated this crucial conversation. "I've given your situation a lot of thought," I began when my father answered. "I am willing to help, but we need to be clear about what that help will look like and what it will require from all of us, including Dylan, to address the long-standing patterns that have contributed to this situation." There was a pause before my father responded, his voice guarded. "What exactly do you mean?" I mean that I will provide consultation on Dylan's legal situation and can recommend attorneys who specialize in white-collar crime. I will not personally represent him or ask my firm to take the case pro bono, as that would be an ethical conflict and inappropriate use of my professional position. I continued before he could interrupt. I will not provide financial assistance for his legal fees or for your living expenses. What I am offering is my professional expertise and guidance through this process, contingent upon all of us, including Dylan, attending family therapy to address the long-standing patterns that have contributed to this situation. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When my father finally spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "So, you're using our crisis as leverage to force therapy on us? This is about your brother facing serious charges, Claire, not about your feelings or childhood grievances." I had anticipated this response, the deflection and minimization that had characterized so many family interactions. This time, I was prepared.
No, Dad. This is about setting healthy boundaries while still offering help. Dylan is facing consequences for his actions after a lifetime of being shielded from them. I'm offering valuable professional assistance that could make a significant difference in his case, but I will not participate in the dysfunctional patterns that brought us all to this point. My mother took the phone, her voice tearful but with an edge on the manipulation I recognized all too well. "Claire, honey, we understand you've had some feelings about how we've treated you and Dylan differently. But this isn't a time to work through family therapy. Your brother could go to prison." I took a deep breath, centering myself before responding. "Mom, Dylan may indeed face prison time, regardless of who represents him. The evidence sounds substantial. What I'm offering is help navigating a difficult legal situation while also addressing the family dynamics that have enabled his behavior for years. Those are my terms. You can accept them or seek help elsewhere." Another long silence followed. I could almost hear their unspoken communication, the looks exchanged, the silent calculation of options. Finally, my father returned to the phone. "We'll consider your offer," he said stiffly. "In the meantime, could you at least send information about attorneys who might take Dylan's case?" I agreed to email a list of reputable criminal defense lawyers specializing in financial crimes, ending the call with a calm assurance that I would be available to discuss next steps when they had made their decision about my terms. After hanging up, I leaned against Michael, emotionally exhausted, but also experiencing a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my relationship with my parents, I had stated my boundaries clearly and stood firm in the face of their manipulative tactics. "That was impressive," Michael said, kissing the top of my head. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," I admitted, and sad and somehow relieved all at once. In the days that followed, I sent the promised list of attorneys and waited. 3 days passed without contact, then 4, then a week. I knew they were testing my resolve, hoping I would cave and offer unconditional help, as I had always done in the past. This time, I held firm. 9 days after our call, my mother contacted me again. Her voice was subdued, the desperation now tinged with resignation. "We would like to accept your help," she said without preamble, "and we'll do the family therapy if that's what it takes." I felt no triumph in their capitulation, only a somber recognition that we were entering uncharted territory in our family dynamic. I had stood my ground, and for once, they had been forced to meet me where I was, rather than demanding I come to them. The following Saturday, I flew to Boston for the first time in over a year. Michael had offered to accompany me, but this was a journey I needed to make alone. As the plane descended through cloud cover, revealing the familiar coastline, I felt a complex mixture of anxiety and determination. My parents' house looked smaller than I remembered, the once immaculate lawn now showing signs of neglect. I parked my rental car in the driveway and sat for a moment, gathering my courage before approaching the front door. My mother answered on the second knock. The woman who stood before me barely resembled the polished, confident mother of my childhood. Her hair, normally perfectly colored and styled, showed gray roots and hung limply around her tired face. Deep lines bracketed her mouth, and her eyes held a haunted quality I had never seen before. "Claire," she said, her voice catching slightly, "thank you for coming." The formal politeness between us felt strange after decades of complicated history. She led me into the living room where my father waited. He too had aged dramatically in the months since I last seen him. Always a robust, authoritative presence, he now seemed diminished, his shoulders hunched forward, his complexion grayish. Aaron was notably absent. "Currently at a friend's house," my mother explained, vaguely, when I inquired, though I suspected he was avoiding this initial confrontation. We sat awkwardly in the living room where I had spent so many holidays feeling invisible. Family photos still lined the mantel, the majority featuring Dylan at various ages and stages. I noticed, with a pang, that my law school graduation photo, once displayed out of obligation, had been removed entirely. My father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. "We've spoken with one of the attorneys you recommended. He thinks he can get the charges reduced, possibly avoid prison time with a plea deal." I nodded professionally. "Roger Hamilton is excellent at negotiating with prosecutors. What is he proposing specifically?" As my father outlined the legal strategy, I could see both parents visibly relaxing, falling into the familiar pattern of discussing Dylan and his needs. This was comfortable territory for them, unlike the emotional reckoning I had required as a condition of my help. When he finished, I set my purse aside and leaned forward, making direct eye contact with both of them. "Now that we've covered the legal aspects, we need to discuss the family therapy component of our agreement." The tension in the room immediately thickened. My mother fidgeted with her wedding ring, a nervous habit from my childhood. My father crossed his arms defensively. "Is that really necessary, Claire?" he asked, his tone dismissive. "With everything going on with Dylan, it seems self-indulgent to focus on therapy right now." It was the exact response I had anticipated, the deflection and minimization that had characterized our family dynamic for decades. This time, I did not back down. "It is not only necessary, it is non-negotiable," I stated calmly. "I have arranged a consultation with Dr. Helen Marshall, a family therapist who specializes in adult family dynamics. Our first session is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10. My father began to protest, but I continued steadily. "This is not a negotiation. If you want my continued legal consultation and assistance navigating Dylan's case, this is the requirement. I am not asking for financial support or even for an apology at this stage. I am asking for honest engagement in a therapeutic process." The directness of my approach seemed to shock them into silence. For perhaps the first time in my life, I was setting the terms of our interaction rather than desperately trying to earn their approval on their terms. After a long pause, my mother spoke, her voice small. "What exactly will this therapy involve?" I explained the process as Dr. Marshall had outlined it to me. Initially, it would involve separate sessions for each family member, followed by targeted joint sessions to address specific relationship dynamics. The goal was not to assign blame, but to establish healthier patterns of communication and interaction. "This is not about punishing you," I clarified, seeing the defensiveness in my father's posture. "It is about healing patterns that have hurt us all, including Dylan. His current situation did not happen in isolation. It is the result of years of enablement and lack of accountability. My father flinched at the word enablement, but did not argue. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her armor of perfectionism cracking to reveal the frightened, overwhelmed woman beneath.
The therapy session the following morning was as difficult as I had anticipated. Dylan attended, sullen and defensive, clearly there only because of the leverage I held over his legal situation. My parents presented a united front of polite cooperation, masking deep resistance. Dr. Marshall, an experienced therapist with a calm, authoritative presence, recognized the dynamics immediately. Over the course of 2 hours, she established ground rules for our ongoing work together, conducted a brief assessment of each family member's perspective, and assigned individual sessions before our next group meeting. When my father attempted to dominate the conversation, she gently but firmly redirected. When my mother became tearful about Dylan's potential incarceration, Dr. Marshall acknowledged her fear while maintaining focus on the larger family patterns. I returned to Chicago the following day, having arranged to participate in future family sessions via video conference when I could not be physically present in Boston. Over the next several weeks, I consulted regularly with Dylan's attorney, providing insights on strategy and helping to interpret legal complexities for my parents. The dual processes of Dylan's legal case and our family therapy unfolded in parallel. In court, Dylan eventually accepted a plea deal that included restitution to his victims, a significant fine, and 2 years of house arrest with 5 years probation. He avoided prison time primarily due to the skill of his attorney and his agreement to cooperate with authorities investigating larger financial crimes in the cryptocurrency space. In therapy, progress was slower and less linear. Initial sessions were tense and often unproductive, with my parents resistant to examining their role in the family dysfunction. My father, in particular, struggled with the suggestion that his parenting had been anything less than exemplary. Dylan oscillated between resentful participation and genuine moments of insight about how parental enablement had contributed to his poor choices. The breakthrough came nearly 3 months into our therapy, during a session focused specifically on my experience of growing up as the less favored child. Dr. Marshall had asked me to share specific memories that illustrated the disparity in treatment. With her guidance, I described several pivotal moments from my childhood and early adulthood, speaking not in accusation, but in a sincere effort to help my parents understand the cumulative impact of their choices. I recounted the missed piano recital when I was 9, the high school valedictorian speech where they had quickly shifted focus to Dylan, the law school graduation they had skipped for his recreational baseball game, and finally, their refusal to help during my divorce while continuing to fund his failing ventures. As I spoke, I watched my mother's face crumple with a recognition I had never seen before. When I finished, there was a long silence in the room. "I had no idea," she finally whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I never saw it that way. I thought you were the strong one, the independent one who didn't need us the way Dylan did." My father sat rigid in his chair, jaw clenched, but I could see the conflict in his eyes, the beginning of an uncomfortable reckoning with decades of choices. In the sessions that followed, we began the painful process of rebuilding our relationship on more honest terms. There were setbacks and difficult moments. My father stormed out of one particularly challenging session when Dr. Marshall pressed him on his different expectations for his son and daughter. Dylan missed several appointments when the discussion became too personally confronting. Yet slowly, incrementally, change began to take root. My mother called me directly, not to discuss Dylan, but to ask about my work, my relationship with Michael, my life in Chicago. My father, after weeks of resistance, finally broke down during a one-on-one session with Dr. Marshall. In our next family meeting, he addressed me directly with tears in his eyes. "I was wrong, Claire," he said, his voice unsteady. "I told myself I was being a good father because I provided for you materially, because I pushed you to excel, but I failed to give you what every child deserves: unconditional love and support. I failed you and are deeply sorry." The apology was not a magical solution to decades of hurt, but it was a beginning, a foundation upon which we could build something new if we chose to. 6 months after Dylan's arrest, Michael proposed during a weekend trip to Lake Geneva. When I called to share the news with my parents, my mother asked thoughtful questions about our plans and offered to help in any way we wanted without attempting to take control. My father expressed genuine happiness and, for the first time in my memory, pride in me that was not compared to or overshadowed by Dylan. We planned a small wedding for the following spring. Throughout the planning process, my parents respected our choices and contributed financially without strings attached. When the day arrived, my father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. During his toast at the reception, he spoke words I had waited a lifetime to hear. "Claire has always been extraordinary," he said, looking directly at me. "Her intelligence, her determination, her capacity for forgiveness and growth have humbled me. I am more proud to be her father than words can express." Dylan attended the wedding with his new girlfriend, a grounded, straightforward woman who seemed to expect accountability from him in a way previous partners had not. Our relationship remained complicated, but therapy had helped us relate to each other as adults, rather than competitors for parental attention and resources. Our family's healing journey was neither quick nor easy. There were difficult conversations, painful acknowledgments, and moments of regression into old patterns. Yet the honest foundation we established allowed for something I had never thought possible: a relationship with my family based on mutual respect rather than performance and approval seeking.
Now, I no longer measure my worth by their approval. The confidence and self-respect I worked so hard to develop became an integral part of who I was, regardless of external validation. And paradoxically, it was only when I stopped desperately seeking their approval that a healthier relationship became possible. If you've ever felt like the less favored child, if you've spent years trying to earn love that should have been freely given, I want you to know that your worth is not determined by someone else's inability to value you properly. Healing begins when you realize the problem was never you. The impact of Dylan's crimes extended beyond our family. The victims of his cryptocurrency fraud faced devastating losses. Margaret Collins, the retired teacher whose pension Dylan had stolen to fund his lifestyle, testified at his sentencing hearing about how the financial devastation had affected her ability to care for her sick husband. "He didn't just steal my money," she said, her voice breaking. "He stole my peace of mind, my ability to provide for my family when they needed me most." Dylan's sentencing hearing was a somber affair. As part of his plea agreement, he was required to address his victims directly. I watched from the gallery as my brother, dressed in an ill-fitting suit, stood before the judge and the families he had betrayed. "I know that saying sorry will never undo the harm I've caused," he said, his voice barely audible. "I let greed and selfishness blind me to the fact that every dollar I took represented someone's hopes, dreams, and security. I have no excuse for what I've done, and I will spend the rest of my life working to make amends." The judge sentenced Dylan to 2 years of house arrest, 5 years of probation, and ordered him to pay full restitution to his victims. My parents would have to sell their house to help cover the restitution payments, a consequence that finally forced them to confront the cost of their decades of enabling. In the months following Dylan's sentencing, our family therapy sessions focused on rebuilding trust and establishing new patterns of interaction.
Dr. Marshall helped us navigate the complex emotions surrounding Dylan's crimes and their aftermath. Accountability is not punishment, she reminded us during one particularly difficult session. It's the foundation of authentic relationships. My relationship with Dylan slowly evolved from hostility to cautious respect. His house arrest and the humiliation of his public downfall had genuinely humbled him. For the first time in his life, he was forced to confront the consequences of his actions without parental protection. "I always thought I was smarter than everyone else," he admitted to me during one of our first honest conversations in years. "But I was just a spoiled kid who never learned that actions have consequences. You tried to warn them about enabling me, and they wouldn't listen. I'm sorry for that, and I'm sorry for how they treated you." My parents' transformation was more gradual, but equally significant. The financial stress of covering Dylan's restitution payments forced them to downsize their lifestyle dramatically. They moved into a small apartment, sold most of their possessions, and for the first time in their lives, faced genuine financial insecurity. "I understand now what it felt like when we told you to figure it out," my mother said during one of our phone calls. "Being abandoned when you need help most is terrifying. I'm ashamed that we did that to you." The role reversal was complete when my parents began asking for my advice and support rather than demanding it. They had been forced to recognize that their golden child was fallible and that the daughter they had taken for granted possessed the strength and wisdom they now desperately needed. During my father's 70th birthday celebration, a modest affair in their small apartment, he pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I spent so many years worrying about Dylan's future that I failed to celebrate your success," he said. "You became everything I hoped you would be, not because of my guidance, but in spite of my neglect. I wasted so much time being proud of the wrong things." Michael and I were married on a perfect spring day in Chicago. My parents attended, genuinely happy for my joy, rather than viewing the wedding as another obligation. Dylan was there too, sober and reflective, accompanied by his girlfriend who had stood by him through his legal troubles. During the reception, my mother approached me with tears in her eyes. "I watch you with Michael and see the kind of love we should have shown you from the beginning. Unconditional, supportive, proud. You deserved that as a child, and I'm grateful you found it as an adult." The wedding represented more than just Michael and my's commitment to each other. It symbolized the healing that was possible when people chose honesty over comfort, accountability over enabling, and genuine love over conditional approval. As we danced to our first song as husband and wife, I looked around at the gathered guests, my chosen family of friends and colleagues, Michael's loving relatives, and yes, even my parents and Dylan. They were all there because they wanted to celebrate our happiness, not because they felt obligated or because they had ulterior motives. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and authentically loved for exactly who I was.
2 years after Dylan's arrest, our family gathered for Thanksgiving dinner in my parents' small apartment. The contrast with previous holidays was stark. Gone was the elaborate table setting in their grand dining room, replaced by a folding table in their modest living space. But the quality of our interactions had improved immeasurably. Dylan, now completed with his house arrest and working at a nonprofit organization helping fraud victims, brought homemade dinner rolls. His girlfriend Sarah, a social worker who had helped him find meaningful work, contributed a green bean casserole. My parents, humbled by their reduced circumstances but grateful for their family's presence, had prepared a simple but loving meal. "I want to say something before we eat," my father announced, standing at the head of the small table. 3 years ago, I would have been focused on what we didn't have: the big house, the expensive wine, the perfect presentation. Today, I'm grateful for what we do have: honesty, accountability, and the chance to rebuild our relationships on solid ground.
My mother nodded, wiping away tears. We almost lost our daughter because we couldn't see past our own mistakes. I'm thankful every day that Claire was strong enough to demand better from us. Dylan raised his glass of sparkling cider. I'm grateful that my sister loved me enough to set boundaries that ultimately saved my life, and I'm grateful for a family that chose healing over enabling, even when it was harder. As we shared the meal, conversation flowed naturally between topics: Michael's latest surgery cases, my upcoming partnership decision at the firm, Sarah's work with domestic violence survivors, Dylan's progress in his victim advocacy training. For the first time in my memory, no one person dominated the discussion, and everyone's contributions were valued equally. After dinner, as we cleaned dishes together, my mother pulled me aside. She said, "I've been wanting to tell you something," she said quietly. Last month, when Margaret Collins came to speak at Dylan's victim advocacy training, she sought me out afterward. She told me that knowing Dylan was working to prevent others from becoming victims had helped her healing process. But then she said something that really struck me. My mother paused, gathering her thoughts. She said, "Your son's sister must be very special. The way Dylan talks about her guidance and strength, it's clear she is the real success story in your family." And I realized she was right. You were always our greatest success, and we were too blind to see it. The conversation was interrupted by laughter from the living room, where Michael and Dylan were engaged in a heated but friendly debate about baseball statistics. My father was refereeing from his armchair, clearly enjoying the normal family banter. "Look at that," my mother said, smiling through tears. "A normal family argument about sports. I never thought I'd be grateful for something so ordinary." As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, Dylan approached me privately. "Claire, I know I can never fully make up for all the pain I caused, not just to my victims, but to you. Growing up in the shadow of my mess couldn't have been easy, and I'm sorry it took something this devastating for me to understand that." He handed me a small, wrapped package. "This is something I've been working on with my therapist. She suggested I write letters to the people I'd hurt, not expecting forgiveness, but as part of taking accountability." Inside was a handwritten letter, several pages long, detailing specific memories from our childhood where Dylan acknowledged the favoritism he had received and the pain it must have caused me. The letter included apologies for specific incidents, times when he had manipulated our parents against me, occasions when he had taken credit for my ideas, moments when he had actively undermined my achievements. "I don't expect this to change anything between us overnight," he said, "but I wanted you to know that I see the past clearly now, and I'm committed to being different going forward." That night, as Michael and I flew back to Chicago, I reflected on how dramatically our family dynamic had shifted. The crisis that could have destroyed us all instead forced us all to confront uncomfortable truths and make difficult changes. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Thank you for not giving up on us, even when we gave up on you. We love you." For years, I had craved those words, desperately seeking the unconditional love and acceptance that should have been my birthright. Now, when they finally came, they felt like a bonus rather than a necessity. I had learned to love myself without their validation, which paradoxically made their love more meaningful when it was finally offered freely. Dr. Rivera had been right during one of our sessions. The goal isn't to change your family. The goal is to change yourself so that their dysfunction can't control your emotional well-being. I had achieved that goal. Whether my family chose healing or continued dysfunction was their choice. My happiness and self-worth were no longer dependent on their decisions. The plane touched down in Chicago as the city lights twinkled below. Michael squeezed my hand as we prepared to disembark. "How are you feeling about all of this?" he asked. "Grateful," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "Grateful that I finally have the family I always wanted, one that includes not just you and the friends we've chosen, but also my parents and Dylan, all of us finally being honest with each other. As we walked through the terminal together, I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of carrying my family's dysfunction, of constantly trying to earn love through perfection, had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I was free.
3 years have passed since that life-changing phone call at 2:15 in the morning. As I sit in my corner office, now a full partner at my firm, looking out at Lake Michigan, I reflect on how much has changed. Dylan completed his house arrest and probation successfully. He now works full-time at a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping fraud victims recover from financial crimes. His transformation from entitled golden child to accountable adult wasn't easy, but it was genuine. He speaks at conferences about the psychology of white-collar crime and has helped law enforcement understand how family dynamics can contribute to criminal behavior. My parents sold their house to help pay Dylan's restitution to his victims. They live simply now in a small apartment, but they seem more at peace than I ever remember them being. My father volunteers at a local literacy program, and my mother tutors struggling students. They've learned to find fulfillment in service rather than in enabling Dylan's grandiose schemes. Our family therapy sessions ended after 18 months, but the lessons learned continue to shape our relationships. We have dinner together when I am in Boston, and the conversations are real now. Not perfect, but honest. My parents ask about my work, my marriage, my dreams for the future. They listen to my answers with genuine interest rather than waiting for their turn to talk about Dylan. Michael and I celebrated our second wedding anniversary last month. We're talking about starting a family, and for the first time, I can imagine raising children without the fear that I'll repeat the patterns of favoritism that defined my childhood. I know what unconditional love looks like now. I see it in Michael's eyes every day, and I've learned to give it to myself. Last month, I received an unexpected letter from Margaret Collins, the retired teacher whose pension Dylan had stolen. She wrote to thank me for my role in holding my brother accountable and for supporting the victim advocacy program he now works with. Your brother told me that it was your strength and boundaries that helped save his life, she wrote. I wanted you to know that by refusing to enable him, you also helped save the lives of future potential victims. Sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no. Her words brought tears to my eyes because they captured something I had struggled to understand, that my decision to set boundaries hadn't been cruel or unforgiving. It had been an act of love, not just for myself, but for everyone Dylan might have hurt if he had continued down his destructive path. I've become a mentor to several young attorneys at my firm, particularly women who struggle with imposter syndrome or difficult family dynamics. I share my story selectively, helping them understand that professional success means nothing if you haven't learned to value yourself. Your worth isn't determined by external validation. It's determined by how you treat yourself and others, by your integrity, by your commitment to growth and healing. Victoria Chen retired last year, but not before ensuring my promotion to full partner. At her farewell dinner, she pulled me aside for one final piece of advice. You've learned the most important lesson of all, she said. You've learned that you don't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. You were always extraordinary. You just needed to believe it yourself. Recently, Dylan asked if he could bring his girlfriend Sarah to Michael's and my house for Christmas this year. Sarah has become someone I genuinely respect and enjoy spending time with. She sees Dylan clearly, holds him accountable, and loves him despite his flaws. A healthier dynamic than he ever had with our parents or previous partners. I'd like that, I told him, but only if you're prepared for Michael to beat you at every board game we own. Dylan laughed, a sound that's become more frequent and genuine over the years. I think I can handle losing for once. As I finish writing this story, I want to leave you with the most important lesson I've learned. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting free. If you've experienced family favoritism, if you've spent years trying to earn love that should have been freely given,
I want you to know that your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to value you properly. Healing begins when you realize the problem was never you. Set boundaries, seek therapy if you need it, build a chosen family of people who see your worth. And remember, sometimes the family we create is more important than the family we were born into. Did you experience family favoritism in your family? How did you handle it? Please share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about setting boundaries and finding self-worth. Remember, sometimes the most important family is the one you choose for yourself. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own journey of healing.